there's something about Yuki. I just think he'll do something special in Japan.
I think this is last chance saloon for Yuki, really. So he may as well go for it. So that's another thing why he's not under so much pressure, I think.
I think they need to completely redefine the job of racing bulls.
I kind of think it works. I think they've just rushed through the drivers.
2 races doesn't just make Liam a bad driver. He hasn't just become a bad driver overnight.
He was the happiest I think I've ever seen a young racing driver get an F1 drive. And in China, he looked broken, like actually broken, and I was worried for him.
How do you guys see the Norris-Piastri fight developing this weekend?
I can see things spicing up between these two. I mean, why wouldn't they?
The key that will define this championship battle is when they first go wheel to wheel.
A home driver making his Red Bull Racing debut. 2 McLaren teammates fighting for the title. The ingredients are there for a fascinating and frenetic Japanese Grand Prix. We're going to preview it here on F1 Nation. I'm Tom Clarkson, and with me this week are Sky Sports F1 presenter Natalie Pinkham and F1 correspondent and presenter Lawrence Barretto. Welcome to you both. Now, the big story going into this race is the driver swap at Red Bull. Yuki Tsunoda replaces Liam Lawson, who's been demoted to Racing Bulls after just 2 races. How has it come to this? And how is Yuki feeling right now? Now, Nat, we've often joked on this show that you are the president and CEO of the Yuki Tsunoda fan club. How do you think he'll deal with this opportunity?
Listen, I don't want to tempt Providence here, but I've got a good feeling. I just think he'll do something special in Japan. It's not going to be easy, though. You look at the Red Bull of last year, where they locked out the front row and they scored a 1-2. This is a very different car this time round, and we've seen just how difficult it is to drive. Liam Lawson is no slouch. He has struggled this year, but there's something about Yuki that raises his game. He's never been out-qualified by a teammate at Suzuka. He scored points last year. I think he is in a good space mentally to deal with the pressure that's come in the last 12 months or so. He should have probably, arguably, had his chance much sooner than he's getting now. I think, this could well be his time.
And Lawrence, how surprised are you that Yuki's got the call up now?
I think that if Liam hadn't qualified 20th in both sprint qualifying and qualifying in China, I don't think we'd be talking about it. It's just that a Red Bull has never qualified that low before. And I think that they could see with Liam that his confidence was so low that they had real no choice but to swap them over.
So they sacked him and made it even lower?
But I think that actually they helped him in a funny sort of way. Because I think if he'd gone to Japan, where he's run really well, and he had a shocker there as well, at least if they move him out now into a Racing Bull that is performing really strongly, he could potentially have a really good weekend in Japan and kind of then firstly say to Red Bull, look, I haven't lost it. I've still got it. You know what? Liam didn't look anyone in the eye over the Chinese Grand Prix weekend. His head was down the whole time. And he was such a confident guy. I remember he was bouncing around when he got that drive for Red Bull last year. He was the happiest I think I've ever seen a young racing driver get an F1 drive. And in China, he looked broken, like actually broken. And I was worried for him.
But then what, Lawrence? Can you ever see a scenario where he could come back to Red Bull? I mean, it's never happened before, but it's not impossible.
I mean, I've talked to people at Red Bull and they say, for what it's worth, yes. But to your point, Natalie, it's never happened before and it's going to be very difficult for him to see a route back. I think now he should just focus on the fact that Pierre Gasly and Alex Albon have rebuilt their careers in Formula One. So even if he never makes it back to Red Bull, at least he had a shot. I know he didn't get very long, but there's still a chance that he can have a very strong career in Formula One. I think it was just that he just didn't get enough time to show what he can do. But Red Bull, they don't hang about, do they? They just don't hang about.
Lawrence, do you know what? I agree with you. I think this is actually a good thing for Liam Lawson because his reputation hasn't suffered that much given how bad the results have been so far. I think public opinion is that, it's Red Bull, it's their driver management issues, and it's not a Liam Lawson issue. So if he steps back to Racing Bulls and does a good job, which I think he will, I think he can recover from this. I did find it interesting last week, though, that Max Verstappen liked a comment from Guido van der Garde on Instagram, in which Guido said, "Look, this is all on Red Bull. You can't sack a guy after 2 races." Max Verstappen doesn't normally get involved in that way. I don't. Were you guys surprised to see that?
I actually wasn't surprised, because I think Max has a strong sense of right and wrong, and he knows actually what matters for racers, and he can probably empathise, although he's never been in this position himself. He's seen this conveyor belt of drivers coming through the ranks. I mean, I think if you fail at Red Bull, to Lawrence's point, you don't fail everywhere. It's a very, very specific car with a very narrow operating window. And for me, the problem at Red Bull is layered. I think Christian Horner does actually care about the welfare of his drivers. He does. There may be others that don't as much. But I think the problem is a complex one, because I think the style of management is such that is much more stick than carrot. I think their pool talent has dried up. I think they didn't have the answers at the end of last year, or even throughout last year. They didn't have an answer to Checo. They were looking around. They rushed the decision about Daniel, which was handled really badly. They pushed Liam in. Liam himself told me that if they hadn't have done that, he would have been off. He said, "Look, I've told them I'm not hanging about. If I don't get the chance now, I've waited long enough." So he became more assertive, and his driving backed that up. So he was, it was evidenced by some strong showings in the Racing Bull. And then he steps up to this team. But I just think that you need to sort of, if I was in the management of Red Bull, and I'm not, and it's a much harder job than it looks, you need to strip it all back and build from the bottom up again. And you need to have you need to have a long, hard look as to how you nurture talent, much in the same way that Mercedes have done with Kimi Antonelli. Kimi has been given a lot of time in the car. He's been protected throughout. Even when he had the off at Monza, they didn't panic. They took the pressure off him, didn't heap it on him, which feels to me like a very different approach than's taken place at Red Bull. But I think they've got a real problem on their hands, because they've got to make a decision in terms of the engineering of this car, whether they broaden it and perhaps lower the peak performance in order to make it easier for the second driver, whoever that may be, to drive, or stick with the peak performance and leave it to Max to bring in the main haul of points and someone else just to hopefully bring it home in the top 10. Christian told us on Sky at the weekend he's never going to sacrifice performance. So where do you go from here? Alex Albon gave this great analogy that it's like a skittish mouse that you're trying to drag across the screen, that when you get it right, it's incredible, but it's so hard to get it right. And actually, there's only one man who's done that.
And it's circuit specific as well. The performance of that car, I would say somewhere like China exacerbated all the issues. Whereas I think you go to somewhere like Suzuka and I think it'll be less of an issue. I expect the car to be more competitive relative to the McLaren.
Well, then why didn't they leave Liam in the car a bit longer, if that is the case?
Is it commercial pressure from Honda? I don't know. But it raises the question, was the discussion in Dubai when they met after China one of, look, we think Liam has no long-term future in this team. We may as well, if we're going to swap him, why don't we swap him in time for Suzuka? So at least we can have a sort of farewell party with Honda. I don't know, though. That's purely supposition from me, but that could be a thing. Another point that we were talking about earlier too is that Liam Lawson told us on Beyond the Grid a few weeks back that he was ringing Helmut Marko and Christian Horner the whole time. He was in their ear for the second half of last year saying, give me the chance, give me the chance. And Yuki Tsunoda wasn't. He was relying on his manager, Mario Miyakawa, to do that. And I think Miyakawa didn't do that, which is why Tsunoda has now swapped management.
I would have done it.
Isn't it interesting?
As chairwoman of his appreciation society, he should have sent me in.
Pinks, you do it most weeks on this show. But I do think that it's such a complex sport in so many ways, yet also it's such a human sport. And the fact that Liam was on the phone the whole time to Helmut and to Christian, impressed them and persuaded them to give him the drive. And unfortunately, it didn't happen. Whereas now Yuki, I feel this is his moment. He's got the new management. That's already impressed Helmut Marko. And, I mean, Lawrence, do you think Tsunoda will go well first time out?
Yeah, I think I agree with Natalie. I think he will do. I think he's got the benefit of he pushed really hard to get the seat for this year, was really irritated that he didn't get it. He's then got seen that Liam, who did get it, has really struggled. So he obviously comes in with slightly less pressure, I think, to deliver. He's going to a circuit where he got a point on, and he was really strong there last year. And last year, I really noticed the difference to the previous year, where he coped much better with the pressure of the home fans. The year before, I think he struggled. It was a bit overwhelming for him. Whereas last year, he really coped really well with it. And already coming back from this winter, I feel like he's mentally tougher. Ordinarily, when he's suffered or he's had a decision go against him, he's kind of carried that for a very long time, and I think that's had a negative input in the way that he performs on track and actually off it. Whereas this year, even on the days when, for example, the wing fell apart in China, he was on the team radio, I understand, saying to the team, "Don't worry guys, it's fine," rather than shouting at the team, which is probably what would have happened maybe last year. So I think mentally he is much stronger to cope with going into this team this year. And he also has that benefit of, like, Liam didn't do the job. He's got nearly 100 races under his belt, and he'll go into a car and he kind of can't get it wrong. Helmut Marko has already come out and said he's got to the end of the year. I mean, frankly, who else are they going to put in that car in the middle of this year? So he's actually got the better time of it, and he's going to have an opportunity, I think, to really put his stamp on it. He's going to struggle. Like, I'm not saying he's going to go in and challenge Max straight away, but I'm confident he'll get out at Q1. I'm confident that he'll have a car that will go, he'll look after the tyres well, he'll be sensible with it. I think he'll push it forward. And if he's sensible, he'll ask for Max Verstappen's exact same setup, and he'll stick with it, and he won't mess about, and he'll just try and do the best without trying to be too fiddly with things.
Now, the only caveat to that, TC, is that Suzuka is a track that demands precision. It requires a calm confidence with the car. And the big question is, will he be able to have that confidence with a car that he's never actually driven before? That we already know is a very difficult car to drive. I don't know. The other thing I would say is I think, you know, and it's not my opinion, this is just what I've been told, that Yuki probably needs to learn how to be a good teammate. Don't always see your teammate as your sparring partner. I know naturally that's what happens, that they're the only person you can judge yourself against, but he has equally got to learn to share, and I think that will be an important part of his growth if he's to have a long-term future at Red Bull.
So I think he actually will do that at Red Bull, because I think, apart from Max, I think he does think he could beat everyone else. Whereas I think he'll probably go into the Red Bull with the mindset of, look, this is Max's team. He's a reigning four-time world champion. I've wanted this forever, so let's just be sensible. I think, Natalie, this might be the one driver that he might learn to work with.
Well, I think that maybe when you're a young driver, you feel this this urge to constantly be competitive and outperform your teammate at all costs. And actually, sometimes the smarter route is to work with them. You help each other in the process.
And Pink, there is no shame in being out-qualified, out-raced by Max Verstappen, and he knows that.
Two stats for you. I mentioned one earlier. Yuki has never been out-qualified by a teammate at Suzuka. Max has never been outperformed in qualifying or the race at Suzuka since 2019. One of those stats is going to be broken this weekend.
Lawrence, Yuki tested for Red Bull in Abu Dhabi after the final race of 2024. I know you've spoken to the team about that test. Were they impressed? In hindsight, did that have an influence in him getting the drive in time for Suzuka?
I mean, they were impressed, because let's not forget that was the first time he'd had a proper performance-related test. Before that, they'd only stuck him in show runs. So isn't that mad that he was coming up to the end of his fourth season, and that was the first test that a proper test that he'd had in a Red Bull? But the team were impressed. I think the thing was they'd pretty much decided by then that it was going to be Liam anyway, and there was literally nothing Yuki could have done. Even finished 5 seconds quicker than everyone else, and I don't think it would have been enough. I think they just decided by that point. I think the point with Liam actually just reminded me about how he was hounding Helmut and Christian. I think sometimes that is a positive, but sometimes that can be a negative. I think that it's up to the team to maybe say, you're not ready. I think experience counts for a lot in Formula One. And yeah, okay, it's great that Liam kept putting the pressure on them to put him in the car. But that doesn't mean that necessarily he was ready to make that step up. He'd only done 11 races across 2 seasons. Yuki had done full seasons, with their own team. They had so much data on him. So I think for Yuki, I think he did everything he needed to do. I don't probably agree with his strategy of maybe not shouting the house down. I think he actually had the experience to go and do that behind the scenes and really make his case. But like we've said already, he's made all the changes, he's learnt his lessons, he's changed his management, he's actually changed the way he talks to senior management. So he's trying to be better. And I think this is last chance saloon for Yuki, really. He kind of knew he was probably going to be out of the Red Bull family at the end of this season. So he's kind of got to go into this seat and give it everything. And look, if it doesn't work out, he probably wouldn't have got the shot anyway had Liam delivered. So he may as well go for it. So that's another thing. That's added to the list of things, of reasons why he's not under so much pressure, I think, going in. Whereas Liam was. I think he'd shouted so hard for it that he had to deliver, didn't he, from the off?
In conclusion, do we feel that in a way this is the natural order? This is how it should have been from race 1. So let's look at the positives for Liam. This is where you should have been racing Bulls from the start of this year. Yuki, this is where you should have been Red Bull Racing.
I find it really difficult to get my head around the fact that 2 races doesn't just make Liam a bad driver. He hasn't just become a bad driver overnight. I think he just can't excel in that car. And we've seen this time and time again with some brilliant racers. Daniel, when he went to McLaren, it just didn't click for him. It doesn't become a bad driver overnight. There's still so much talent there. And I think, perhaps going back to Lawrence's point, perhaps he's entirely right that this will be long-term better for him. He won't see it yet because he'll see this as a failure in the short term. But actually, as you said, TC, if he has a strong weekend this weekend, his confidence will start to top back up again. But it doesn't take away from the fact that, and sorry, but Helmut Marko's comments about Isaac Hadjar have sort of been forgotten with all of this. The story's moved on. But that was a really important thing that we shouldn't just gloss over that. These are young drivers that need an arm around them. And actually, you could apply the same principle to anything in life. People respond better if they're encouraged and they're nurtured and they help the talent grow. And that is something that I don't believe Red Bull have done well enough for years now. Some may say that Helmut Marko's approach works. Well, the evidence suggests otherwise.
I think this also raises a question about racing bulls. Does Red Bull need 2 Formula One teams now? Because when they bought Minardi back in 2005, the lay of the land was very different. Drivers weren't necessarily ready when they arrived in Formula One, and having a junior team to help develop them was hugely useful for Red Bull. Whereas now, just look at Kimi Antonelli, look at Ollie Behrman, look at all the young guys coming in now, the simulators, the TPC testing, the old car testing. They seem to arrive so ready to go that I'm not sure Red Bull needs a junior team for developing drivers. I think they need to completely redefine the job of racing bulls, because I think the constant need to provide 4 drivers in Formula One creates more headaches for them now than it does positives.
I'm interested to see what will happen if Yuki does perform well, because could we get to the end of this season and suddenly say, well, actually, Racing Bulls has done its job because it's got Yuki ready to go to step up to the Racing Bull team. Isaac Hadjar at that point might have had a stellar season himself. Liam might have proved himself ready to go. Lindblad might have had a great season in F2, and actually, suddenly, it's all looking rosy. Well, imagine if Max leaves. Actually, they probably do need that chain of drivers ready to go to step it up. I think maybe what Red Bull might need to consider doing is letting some drivers go a little bit easier. Carlos really had to fight to get out. Pierre really had to fight to get out. I think if there was this understanding that they will support them, but if there is this blockage getting into the main team, actually, it's not the end of the world. You're not going to be sat on the bench at the sister team forever, or you're not going to be on the sidelines forever. If they were maybe a little bit more open to that, and then just kind of taking on the, we were Red Bull, we brought you through, taking that kind of the benefit that comes with that. Maybe that would be a good thing, but I kind of think it works. I think they've just rushed through, like to Natalie's point earlier, I think they've just rushed through the drivers. Imagine if they'd put Ricciardo in the car. Suddenly they would have had Yuki and Liam ready to go underneath it, and suddenly the system would look brilliant. Because even if Daniel hadn't performed, they would have had 2 drivers ready to go. I think they've just cycled through the drivers far too quickly, and I think they've just made this error, ignoring the Ricciardo move. I think they've just made the error of choosing Liam over Yuki, and then that's kind of caused us all to go, well, are they in trouble? Is the system not working?
Right, well, that is undoubtedly the big story going into the Suzuka weekend. But let's have a look at performance now. And while we're talking Red Bull, what do we think of their chances? Suzuka has always been a Red Bull track. It's an aero track where you want, aero efficiency through the high-speed sweeps of Sector 1, for example. Do you think they're going to be as competitive as they were last year when they finished 1-2?
They're not going to be as competitive as they were last year, but I think they are going to be closer to a McLaren and potentially a Ferrari. I'm a Ferrari, the one team that I'm struggling to predict what they're going to do because they've been so up and down in the first couple of races. But I think in theory, Red Bull should be closer, and therefore we should, in theory, have a 3-way fight. I think Max is a driver who can, as we've seen in the first 2 races, make that car, as difficult as it is, a very performant car. So I think actually he'll probably be able to work around it. He really goes well at Suzuka, like Natalie said earlier. He suits the track characteristics suit him really well. But I don't think they're going to be in the fight for victory on pure performance. I still think that's McLaren, because I think at the minute that car that they've got are the ones to beat on any given circuit, as long as they nail the setup from the start of the weekend. But I do expect Red Bull to be closer. I think their challenge will just be that Yuki will take a little bit of time to get up to speed, and there'll have to be a bit of focus on trying to help him bed in as well. Whereas for Max, obviously, I think he'll kind of find that setup change pretty quickly, like he has done this season, in a way that he didn't manage to do last year.
I mean, TC, if they can emulate even some of those moves from last year, do you remember Checo at the 130R? Double overtake on both the Mercedes. It's such a track. I mean, it's just a purist track. It's one of the oldest ever on the calendar, and it's just great. I have to say, anyone who hasn't been to Japan, put it on the bucket list. There's something quite joyous about the place. Hardcore racing, but also, I would say, the most creative, dedicated fans in the world. When you turn up there, there's just such an incredible energy, isn't there?
From the moment you arrive, I mean, you've got the funfair sort of on the far side of the pit straight from the paddock, which gives it a unique atmosphere as it is, and then just look at the different sectors around the lap. The drivers almost unanimously will tell you that Sector 1 is one of the best pieces of racetrack in the world. The fast sweeps leading up to those 2 really quick Degner right-handers. Hugely challenging, very little runoff. It's an old school track in that mistakes really do get punished because there's gravel and actually tyre barriers not far from them. And then you come through and then you've got the long left-hander of Spoon and then 130R that there is not a bad bit of racetrack at Suzuka. It's wonderful, and I always have a bit of a pilgrimage to during FP1. Every year I go to stand on the hill between 130R and the 2 Degners, and you can sort of see them coming through the Degners on one side and then watch the cars coming towards you through 130R the other way. And it's one of the highlights of my season. It really is. It's so spectacular. And funnily enough, watching Max Verstappen through the 2 Degners, which are really fast, particularly Degner 1. It's all about precision, and Max is always spectacular through there. So I can't wait to go, point 1. And point 2 is I agree with Lawrence that Red Bull will be more competitive this weekend, but not race-winning competitive. At the start of the show, we mentioned we have 2 McLaren teammates fighting for the title, heading to Suzuka. We've seen that before, haven't we?
This is the opportunity that Senna's looking for, and he's going through, out! Oh my goodness, this is fantastic! They beat. This is what we were fearing might happen during the race. And that means to say that Prost has won the World Championship.
Now that was one of the most famous teammate clashes in F1's 75-year history. It was 1989, Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost, and it decided that year's World Championship in very controversial circumstances. Now, we're not suggesting that Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri's relationship today is anything like Prost and Senna's. But that was the last time we had two McLaren drivers so closely matched fighting at the front at Suzuka. And it is going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. We're 2 races into the 2025 season. They have 1 win apiece. How do you guys see the Norris-Piastri fight developing this weekend? Pinks?
So to this point, we have seen a very cool, calm cat in Oscar Piastri, but there hasn't been a championship at stake. I'm wondering whether something's going to change this year. In his rookie year, he came in, he bedded in, and he quietly tucked in behind Lando Norris, and I think was really well advised by Mark Webber just to keep your head below the parapet, just take it all in, learn each circuit, work on your tyre management, all the sort of little chinks in your armour. And he came back much stronger for it the following year. Now he's a genuine title contender. And I think we saw from China that he's got all the strings to his bow. I can see things spicing up between these two. I mean, why wouldn't they? They're both incredible racers, hugely talented, in the quickest car, both absolutely, rightly so, believing that they've got a shot at the title.
I think it's going to get super, super spicy. And I do think that Oscar's learned a load of lessons from last year about how to go and race Lando. On the other side of it, I do think Lando is mentally tougher this year. I think he's got that belief in himself. And so I think he will still back himself to be able to beat Oscar. I think the key for Oscar this year is to qualify like he did in China. If he can continue to be strong on the Saturdays in a way that he wasn't last year, he might actually take the fight away from Lando anyway if he starts well. Because I think, as we saw how well he controlled that race in China, he's so horizontal that I think anyone who throws any sort of pressure at him in a Grand Prix, he'll just be able to absorb it. So I think that is what Lando's got to be. If he wants to make sure he beats him this year, he's got to out-qualify him.
I think momentum is going to be crucial in that intra-team battle, isn't it? Whoever gets off on the right foot on a FP1 on a Friday, I think could easily end up carrying that momentum all the way through. And that's kind of what we saw in China. One observation on Lando that surprised me in China, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it, was that he turned up to Media Day on Thursday and was immediately telling everybody how difficult the car was to drive, how the team... I thought the implication was the team we need to work harder to get the car more to my style. Okay, I'll drive it if I have to drive it like this, but can we work a bit harder on getting it more towards me? I was surprised that he came out and publicly said a lot of that. I'm sure, say it full volume in a debrief when you're just among the team, but to come out on race 2 and tell everybody that the car was very difficult to drive, this being the car that you just dominated the opening Grand Prix of the year in, surprised me. And is there I don't know, I found myself wondering if there was a link between him being unsettled with the car, despite having won the first race, and then Oscar stealing a march on him for the rest of that weekend.
Yeah, because I think momentum works on a micro and a macro level, momentum throughout a single race weekend and momentum throughout the season. You're totally right that for Oscar to bounce back after the massive disappointment from Australia, I mean, he didn't do much wrong in Australia. He had that off that ultimately put paid to his race and drops him down tonight. But actually throughout the rest of the weekend, he was very strong. And it was so important for Oscar to come back with a really strong showing in China. I agree with you. I don't know why, but Lando always seemed on the back foot in China. That could well swing back in Japan. Talking to insiders at McLaren, they think they're going to be very strong in Japan, even stronger than they were in China. But it was interesting, whether it was a tactic or whether maybe Lando just wears his heart on his sleeve a bit too much. I'm not sure what his motivation was to do and say that publicly, but you're right. People buy into it, don't they? If you say things aren't going well for me, they buy into it, and then it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. But I think it's sometimes better to be on the front foot with these things.
I kind of think that's Lando, though. He's always been like that, hasn't he? Even on the good days, he's said the good things. On the bad days, he's been too honest. Like we're kind of hinting at like when things are going wrong. I think
it's quite refreshing, though, isn't it?
I love it. I think it's great. I think from my perspective, and yours, Natalie, where we get to talk to him, that's what we want, right? We want to hear what he's feeling on the good days and the bad days. And I think Lando's unique, actually, on the grid in that format. I do think it hurts him maybe on a professional battle against his rivals side of things. But I think what I read from that when Lando was saying about the car is it's not the first time he said the McLaren's hard to drive. I remember even when Daniel was struggling, Lando came out and he said, look, this is a difficult car to drive. I think there is probably something inherent within the McLaren that's evolved over the last few years, that there is some difficult to drive. He's just always found a way around it. And I wasn't sure whether he was just trying to say it's difficult to drive, but I'm still finding a way to go and win in the way and dominate in the win that he did in Australia. And maybe he was trying to mind games the other way with Oscar as well, because I do think Lando knows how good Oscar is, and I think Lando feels that he's put a lot of the hard work in at McLaren to help them on that journey to where they are now. And obviously Oscar's turned up at this team at a point when the car is very strong very early in his career, and I think Lando kind of feels like if there is a shot, he should be the one taking that shot straight away. And the threat that Oscar is delivering, to Natalie's point earlier about how he listened to what Mark said and kind of just learned a lot last year, and now has basically leveled it up already in a couple of races this year, at a point when the McLaren is, even if not Red Bull-less dominant, it is a step ahead of everyone else. That Lando isn't the one who's then gone and instantly capitalised that, and the first couple of races is going to be tough for him to take. So I'm intrigued to see how he'll now bounce back this weekend in Japan. I think it's a circuit that he technically should do well at. Oscar's run well there as well. But I think the key that will define this championship battle is when they first go wheel to wheel. When whatever the team orders are, whether they choose to listen to them or not, it's who comes out on top in that first battle. And I think that will define the whole year.
Lots. Do you think they'll listen to the team orders when they're first issued when it comes to winning the race?
I think it's going to be really difficult for them to do it, because if it is now looking like a 2-horse race and one driver is told you can't go after the other, I think it's going to be so difficult, because you don't know what's going to happen with the 2026 regs. You don't know whether McLaren are going to be up there. This could potentially be the first chance that these guys get for years to win the title. It's going to be difficult for them to do it. I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if I could listen.
I'm just reminded of, not bad for a number 2 driver, multi-21, all of those moments that scarred Mark Webber, Oscar's manager, when he was a Red Bull driver. I can't see Webber allowing it. I think the message to Oscar will be, you've got to go for it.
Because now he lives vicariously through him, TC. He can write all the wrongs of those years.
Exactly. Now, look, one quick observation on Oscar is that I think someone who deserves a lot of credit for Oscar 2.0 that we've seen this year is his new physio, Arthur. That is actually the only person who's changed in Oscar's team over the winter. And I think we have seen a more impressive, faster, actually, Oscar Piastri this year. Now, Arthur he's a Finn. He's a very cool customer. He's worked in the NFL prior to working with Oscar Piastri. So he's got experience from other sports that he's brought with him. And I do think Oscar has reacted really, really well to having him in his camp. And when we go to Suzuka, I also think Oscar drives in a very similar manner to Mark Webber. Webber was always brilliant through fast corners, always faster than Sebastian Vettel through fast corners, and Suzuka is a fast corner track. So, and given that Oscar outqualified Lando on his first visit there back in 23, then Lando outqualified him last year, so it's even Stevens on the qualifying head-to-head so far. But I think the Oscar we've seen this year so far makes me think, given it's a fast track with fast corners, that he would be he's my favourite going into this race.
TC, just on that point, do you think when older drivers are looking to mentor younger ones, they do look for someone that they can relate to, that they do look for the mini-me versions of themselves? I'm thinking about Fernando with Bortoletto and Mark with Oscar. Do you think that is part of the process, that they think, almost like a father figure?
Definitely a father figure. I would agree with that. I think, Oscar came to England, he's Australian, to remind people, came to England when he was 14. And I think, Webber has become paternal influence because family stayed back home in
Was
Melbourne.
history repeating itself? Exactly what happened with Mark.
Fair point, except I think he lacked maybe that paternal figure over here. So I think Mark has taken it upon himself to guide him. And I think all he was looking for was a quick, cool customer. And then Oscar is becoming, over the years, more and more like Mark Webber, I think.
The nature-nurture thing.
I'm also... Yeah, exactly. I'm also fascinated. It's funny you mention Fernando Alonso and Gabriel Bortoleto. I love the fact that Alonso is now racing his protege.
Yeah, so do I.
And I can't wait till they go wheel to wheel. Forget Norris and Piastri. Alonso and Bortoleto battling over points would be something to watch.
It's going to happen.
Look, Mercedes now, a lead driver with 2 podiums out of the opening 2 races, and a rookie who's settled in with points and very good pace. The post-Hamilton era at Mercedes has started very well. Let's talk about George Russell, first of all. 2 podiums from those opening 2 races. Huge praise from Toto Wolff, who doesn't dish it out generously, I should say. Loz, what's your assessment of George Russell in 2025?
I've been super impressed with George from the moment that he did their traditional pre-briefing at St Kilda Beach in Australia. It felt like he was really relishing the fact that he was leading this team, that, you know, he was out of Lewis Hamilton's shadow. I don't think George got the kind of plaudits that perhaps he deserved for the way that he went up against Lewis, I think, in their time together. And I think that the performances that he's delivered in Australia and China in 2 very different races with a car that isn't really good enough to be getting a podium, I think, at this minute. I think it's just below where it should be. I think Ferrari have underperformed. I think George has just not put a foot wrong. And in my experience, when I talk to George in TV pens, is he never really bigs himself up all that much, but he was quite keen in China to say it was one of my best performances ever. And I think that was a good signal maybe to the rest of the world as people continue to speculate about whether or not Max Verstappen is going to be joining Mercedes, that he was kind of saying or reminding the world, look, I've just got 2 podiums in a row. I can be the team leader. You know, Kimi Antonelli might be the future of this team, but at the minute, I am delivering. And I think it's also significant, like you said, Tom, that Toto was coming out and maybe moving to make George feel a little bit better about the kind of performances that he's delivered in these couple of races, because at some point Toto is going to have to make some big decisions. And I think Kimi is potentially showing that he is as good as Mercedes thought he was coming when they brought him through. But I think George has been outstanding. I think China, he was brilliant. And I know that might seem odd to say for a drive to P3, but I don't think he put a single foot wrong. And I don't think we've seen that many drives from George over his career. I think this is his first back-to-back podium as well. I know he also hasn't always had the car to achieve that, but I think that he could potentially very quickly string together a load of performances that really do mark him out as a potential star of the future.
Do you think Mercedes can challenge McLaren at Suzuka? Because, you know, George did qualify second for the Grand Prix in China, just a 10th off Piastri.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they could. I think their qualifying car is actually the most shocking in a positive way of what they've achieved so far this year. I think that even George is surprised at just how much of a turnaround that they've managed to being able to, you know, generate heat in the tyres. Even when they were struggling actually to do tyre warm up in the first couple of races, they found a way that they weren't able to do that in previous years. The team
it almost surprised him, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, isn't that really positive that it surprised him and they managed to get the job done, and they just haven't been able to do that in the last, 3 years, really, of this generation of car. So I think from that perspective, he can probably smell it. I think he can feel that he's really in there. And I think George will really relish being the person who's just off the top teams. You know, you can probably see Lando and Oscar primed to go up against it. He knows he's got a car that's just off, and he will be that guy to make the most out of a car. I think he'll really relish this opportunity.
Yeah, and also I do think he's stepped into that leadership role so confidently and calmly, because he hasn't held back in his praise for Kimi either. It would be easy to try and pick faults with a young rookie that's perhaps coming onto his patch, but he hasn't. He just keeps backing Kimi up publicly at every opportunity. And that's exactly the kind of leader that you want at the team. Toto's made it hard for himself, hasn't he, to get rid of him if he genuinely thinks he's in the top 3 drivers on the whole grid.
What about Kimi Antonelli? He's 5th in the drivers' standings. He's done everything I think asked of him so far. That would be my analysis. What about yours?
Well, Australia was magnificent, wasn't it? To navigate his way through everything that was thrown at him during that race, to do that as a rookie. Well, we saw 4 out of the 6 rookies not make the checkered flag. So what Kimi was able to do on race day was nothing short of remarkable. He then obviously had to improve his qualifying performance. He had a problem in Australia anyway, and he came back and did exactly that in China. So he's 18. I think we have to keep reminding ourselves he is so young, and yet he's hit the ground running. He's such a joy to be around. He's lovely energy about him, and he's very modest. I mean, when he was told he had driver of the day, he went, "Me?" He couldn't believe it. I don't think the McLaren boys could either. They were like, "Say what?"
He's got a lot of fans, has Kimi.
Yeah, it's true.
F1 Nation's preview of the Japanese Grand Prix continues with Ferrari. They arrive in Japan after both cars were disqualified in China, one for being underweight and the other for an excessively worn plank. Now, the first priority is to make sure that doesn't happen again. Now, Lawrence, you said a little bit earlier you think Ferrari have been underperforming this year. So where do you see their level?
I mean, they definitely didn't think 2 races in they'd be level on points at Williams. I mean, it is extraordinary what has happened in these first couple of races for a team that actually, if you talk to many in the paddock in Bahrain during testing, they would have told you that they were the closest threat to McLaren to fighting for the world title this year. I'm not saying that threat won't materialise over the course of this season, but I think they have definitely underperformed. Yes, okay, I get that Lewis won the sprint, but I think what was really interesting is that he made only a couple of changes to that car and it fell away and it essentially fell off a cliff and he was nowhere in the Grand Prix. And the other way is Charles made a couple of changes and it was in the positive direction. So I think we maybe might have moved into this realm of this very unpredictable Ferrari again that I felt like they were moving away from. They seemed to have a very stable baseline last year to be able to add performance. This year, if they have got this car that, because they took a lot of risks, they made a lot of changes, and if they are going to spend the first half of this season trying to understand what kind of package that they've got, while having simultaneously a 7-time world champion trying to understand a new team, I think they're massively up against it. That said, that window where Lewis was so strong, both in qualifying and the race for the sprint, shows that actually if they get everything right, they should have a package to deliver. But look, I think Fred will be disappointed. I think senior management at Ferrari will be disappointed because I think this season could get away from them very, very quickly. And in a year where they're going to have to start to make decisions on 2026 very quickly and want to maybe steal a march here, if they have another couple of bumpy races where they aren't able to kind of get in the mix and haul themselves back into the fight, they might have to make those kind of big decisions even earlier.
I think the season can get away from them quickly, but it can also come back to them quickly. I don't think that it's quite panic stations just yet. We've got 22 races to go. But I think one of the big concerns was the 2 DNFs were for different reasons. And I do find that quite troubling. And in this modern era with, such massive budgets that 2 very significant mistakes, but different mistakes are made. I kind of would have got it if both had been underweight or both had had excessive plank wear, but they were 2 different issues. And then I think in terms of, I'm not taking anything away from Lewis's sprint win, but clearly putting it on pole was the most significant thing he could do that weekend, because then he had the clear air to bring it home. And, that's no mean feat, I know, within itself. That was a big moment and a big morale boost, but notably they weren't celebrating it behind the scenes. This was just another mini step forward, if you like. The Grand Prix win would have been a much bigger deal for them. But I do think they can turn it around. I think you touched on it just then, Lawrence, about the Ferrari of old. We did think those days of poor strategic decisions and disarray, if you like, were a thing of the past. And Fred Vasseur had sort of ushered in a new era for Ferrari where these things didn't happen anymore. And we have seen a few worrying signals to that extent. But I do think that they've got what it takes, particularly with Lewis at the team, to bring it back round.
No, I agree, and it's a small sample, isn't it, as well? We're talking about 2 races where they've got a new driver in the team. They've also got Charles, who's trying to kind of show that he's the team leader and make the most out of the time that he spent at the team and showing that he's their future. So, yeah, don't get me wrong that I think that they can turn it around. I just think that when they look back on these first couple of races, and to your point about the fact that they made 2 separate mistakes, that's the first time they've ever had a double disqualification. This is not the kind of mistakes that Ferrari, or at least Fred Vasseur's new Ferrari, should be making. And I think that is a sign that although he has made changes, they're going to have to tighten it up even more, I think, going forward if they're going to avoid this happening again.
And it shows just how fine the margins are in Formula One in 2025, that you are pushing the limits to the extent that you are. And let's not forget too that we've had disqualifications, almost every year for as long as I can remember. Mercedes, George Russell lost the win at Spa last year. Then there was Austin the previous year as well. I tend to see the cup half full when it comes to Ferrari. I see a massive step forward from Melbourne to China, and I think they can continue in that vein. So I'm sort of thinking that it's definitely not over for them yet in 2025. I think Lewis Hamilton has a great record at Suzuka with 4 wins. He relishes the track, and I could see them challenging for the top positions this weekend. I see them challenging where George Russell and Mercedes are going to be, in that area, just a couple of tenths back from McLaren potentially. Now, we've talked about it being Yuki Tsunoda's home race at Suzuka, and he'll be stealing the headlines. But another high-profile Formula One figure who's going to be celebrating his home race as well is Ayo Komatsu, the team principal of Haas. So why don't we just have a quick chat about that team? Of course, they're now working with Toyota, which makes it even more of a home race for the team as well. They come from China, where they got a double points finish. Do we think they can continue that momentum this weekend?
I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? They were nowhere in Australia. We were genuinely worried about them. And then they come back with a double points finish, which, by the way, then got further promoted with the double disqualification for Ferrari. It's interesting. I think I really like their driver lineup. I think they'll bring out the best in each other. I think they're both tenacious, feisty drivers. I think Ollie has just hit the ground running. I mean, I know we've got Japan first, but I'm looking forward to him going back to Saudi as well, where he had that super sub debut a year ago. I can't believe it's been nearly a year. But I think they've got a lot to be excited about as a team. And I've always been a big fan of Ayo Komatsu. I think he approaches things with this engineering mind, and he has racing in his DNA. I think they've got a lot to be excited about.
Yeah, I've got a lot of respect for what that team have done, because they were lost in Australia. They had no idea why they were so bad. Esteban Ocon in particular was like, this car is nothing like it was when I was in testing. I know they weren't troubling the timesheets in testing, but that was the plan. That's what they did last year. So for them to turn around and actually make progress, if you look at the granular progress from practice 1 through to the race, they were able to make those step changes that they were proven that they could do for the first time ever last year. So obviously, again, sample of 2, so it could be that it flips the other way, and I'm not saying that they've completely unlocked this car, but I think what they can take massive confidence in is that this Haas team have always struggled when they've found a problem. It's taken them races, maybe even half a year to understand what's happened, and they were able, for whatever reason, they might have lucked into it, but whatever reason, they were able to turn things around for China. So if they are able to be strong again in Japan, and actually I think the signs are that they should be on this kind of circuit, then I think that will bode really well for Ayo and prove that actually last year wasn't like a flash in the pan and it wasn't pure luck. I think there's some speculation that, they threw everything at last year to the detriment of this year, and that they weren't putting anything into this car in the way that, Williams turned their attention to the 25 car very early. So I think if they can have a strong one here in Japan and then get a couple of races, fair play to them. I think the job they've done is very impressive.
I think the thing as well, TC, is that Australia is something of an outlier of a track. I think it can give you misleading results. And I think the more races we get under our belts, they're all very different challenges, aren't they? The next few races, but we'll start to see patterns emerge. And some of them may be track specific, but I think Australia sort of threw everyone off the scent a little bit. And it was very difficult to get a read on the pecking order. So hopefully China is a mark in the sand for them and they can build from that.
Yeah, definitely helped by the smooth track surface in China, so they could lower the ride height a little bit. But I was really impressed by Ollie Behrman in China after a hugely difficult season opener in Australia, or practice and qualifying in Australia, and he bounced back in no uncertain terms. So proving, I think, what a lot of people already knew, but mentally he's incredibly tough. And I think they could very much continue the same trajectory in Suzuka this weekend. Now, look, one final team I wanted to ask you guys about was Williams. Equal on points with Ferrari. I mean, I feel I need to keep saying that because it's such an extraordinary stat. I did want to ask you about Carlos Sainz's performance as well, because Alex Albon has thus far showed him the way home.
I think the only surprise is that Carlos hasn't been stronger, but I think there have been mitigating circumstances that have led to that. I also think that Alex has been really impressive, and I think Carlos joining the team has meant Alex has raised his game. There is a steely determination about Alex Albon now that I haven't seen before. I've always thought he's lovely bloke and a great racer, but there just seems to be even more of an edge now, and that's what he needed, I think, to sort of kick on with his career.
Yeah, I think Alex just hasn't had that, has he, in the last few races, last few years rather, where he's had that driver on the other side of the garage really pushing him. He's been the one to drag the team along, and I think he really saw when Carlos came in that Abu Dhabi test and the performance he put in there, then the kind of performance he delivered straight out of the box in Bahrain. I do think that's forced Alex to level up in a really positive way. I think on Carlos's side, it's not worrying, but because he's been in this position before. When he joined McLaren, it took him maybe 2/3 of a season, half a season to really kind of get underneath the skin of that car, and then it clicked. And I do believe there'll be this overnight moment where he'll find a way to get the tricks out of this car, as he likes to say. At the minute, there's too many things he doesn't understand with the car, and he's not excelling. But I think of a slightly greater concern is that he was strong in testing and in Abu Dhabi, and he just didn't have the confidence in Australia and China, and that is really unusual for him. He just can't understand it. And I think throughout his time at Ferrari and for most of his time at McLaren, he kind of always knew why he wasn't quick in the car. So again, kind of what we've said a lot about a lot of other drivers, it's important that he kind of builds in these next couple of races an understanding of the car that he's got and why he isn't able to get the most out of it, and not let it get into his head too much that Alex on the other side of the garage is doing such a great job. Now, of course, Alex is going to love this, obviously, because you always want to one-up your teammate. And I think the performance that Alex is putting in is very strong. But I think Carlos will still back himself to be able to get up to that level of Alex. And then when we get to that stage, and it's just a matter of time, I think, then James Vowles has got the teammate lineup that he kind of describes as one of the best on the grid and will help pull this team forward. So it's kind of a matter of time, and I do think it will come, but I wouldn't expect it to come super quickly because history shows that it does take him a little bit of time to get comfortable.
I think that process will be expedited by their teamwork. I think they've already shown that they click as teammates and they're prepared to work hard together for those answers that clearly need to come as quickly as possible, particularly for Carlos. He'll be frustrated. He just needs to get a couple of big races under his belt and get back to delivering podium strong point finishes, whatever it is, that something's just got to click for him, hasn't it, within that team?
So many plots and subplots. Guys, it's been wonderful to chat. Thank you very much for your time. I can't let you go without asking for your podium predictions.
I
Japanese
hate
Grand Prix.
predictions, TC. Why do you always do this?
That's just you stalling, so you get Lawrence to go first.
Exactly. You know me too well.
Well played, Natalie. Well played. Okay.
And I'll just cut and paste what he says.
Because I think you're going to disagree with me, Pinks. I'm going to go for a Lando win. I think it's going to be a Lando win, Oscar second. I think Lando's going to bounce back. He's going to have a stronger quali. I think he's going to lead from the front. The final podium is trickier, but I'm going to say I think Ferrari are going to be the second best team, so I think it's going to be Charles Leclerc. I think he's just going to edge out Lewis.
I'm going to go for McLaren as well, 1-2. Won't commit to which one.
Oh, Natalie, come on.
Okay, I'm just, for the sake of debate, I'm going to say Oscar will take the win, Lando second, and Max third.
I think I'm more in the Pinks camp on this one. I think it's going to be a Piastri win. I actually think something's going to come undone on the other side of the McLaren garage, and Max Verstappen is going to put it P2.
Okay.
With Hamilton P3.
Oh, wow.
I think 3 different cars on the podium is what we're going to have this weekend. Bonus prediction, who is going to finish ahead? Yuki Tsunoda or Liam Lawson?
Well, look, I wish Liam all the best. I think it's just been a really strange sequence of events for his career. I think he can bounce back from this, but I do think, I don't know, I've just got a good feeling that Yuki's going to do something special in Japan and he'll get into the points and finish ahead of Liam.
I mean, I think it speaks volumes that we're talking about the fact that there could be a battle between a Red Bull and a Racing Bulls, and that, I think that shows how strong the Racing Bulls car is, right? I think it's been mega this year. So I actually think it's going to be super close. I think they're both going to get into the points, but I think Yuki is going to edge it. I think he'll just edge out Liam. But I think the very fact that they're both fighting for points is good for both of their confidence kind of going forward, ultimately, because I think they're 2 very strong racing drivers. So that's what I want. I want them to have a good weekend, and I think they will do, because I think that Racing Bull is going to be so quick around Suzuka.
I love this positivity. What a way to set up the rest of my day. Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you, TC.
Now it's a new season, and we've even got F1 TV's Laura Winter on board as Deputy Team Principal. But it's the same old story for our F1 fantasy team, F1 Nation Racing. We're roughly 185,000th in our league, which is not a good start. We had Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton in our team for China, so we lost points when they were disqualified. For Japan, we'll swap Hamilton for Oscar Piastri and bring in Ollie Behrman. You can, of course, play F1 Fantasy for free. Pick your team and join our league to play against us, probably beat us, and everyone else listening. My thanks to Natalie and to Lawrence. Great to get their thoughts ahead of the Japanese Grand Prix. And before I go, here's a quick word on F1's other podcasts. Jaime Alguersuari is my guest on F1 Beyond the Grid this week, a man who knows a thing or two about the snakes and ladders of racing in the Red Bull family. And on F1 Explains, McLaren CEO Zach Brown talks about the inner workings of the F1 Boss group chat and how to run a racing team. You can listen to F1 Beyond the Grid and F1 Explains right here on your podcast app. F1 Nation will of course be back after this weekend's race with our review of the Japanese Grand Prix. But for now, F1 Nation is produced by Formula One and Audio Boom Studio.